Hello, how are you?
Good, how are you?
Doing good, doing good. We can go ahead and get started. Thank you so
Yeah.
much for hopping on. I'll just introduce myself and then I'll have you introduce yourself.
Okay.
Perfect. So, hi everyone. Hopefully, you guys know me or both of us. My name's Morgan, third year medical student at NYU in New York City. And today we're going to be chatting all about the medical school personal statement.
Yeah. Well, thank you for having me,
Of
Morgan.
course.
Um, my name is Marin. I'm a second year medical student at the Icon School of Medicine at Mount Sinai, also in New York.
So exciting. So I know people are here, they want to learn about the medical school personal statement, and we have a full agenda lined up today. We're going to chat all about it. But first, I just want to hear a little bit about your story, because I know that you did the FlexMed program, so you knew that you were going to medical school very early on in undergrad. So what did that process look like, and why did you decide to do that program?
Yeah. So yeah, for FlexMed, like you have to apply during your sophomore year. So I found out about it during my freshman year from like also a current like admitted student from Hopkins, which is where I went to college. So for the application, it's like three essays that you have to submit and then like a few letters of recommendation. And yeah, just like the general medical school process.
Yeah.
So I decided to do it because it sounded really interesting, and then I looked into like Mount Sinai, and I loved the program.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, I was also like lucky enough to talk to like current medical students at Sinai at the time, and I just like fell in love with the school. So that's why I applied, and then I knew that it wasn't a binding process, so I wasn't too stressed out yet. Just like for applying because unlike other early assurance programs, which usually are like binding, Sinai's not. So that's why I applied to FlexMed.
Amazing. And then did you decide to apply to other medical schools when the traditional cycle came around, or did you fully commit to going to Sinai through the FlexMed program?
Yeah, so FlexMed's not binding, but you have to commit to it
Okay,
like before the traditional cycle opens. So
gotcha.
you're not able like you can't take the MCAT and you can't apply to other like medical schools. So I didn't apply, but there's like a lot of other early insurance programs that I just didn't know about at the time
Mm-hmm.
and applied to like multiple at the same time.
Gotcha. Gotcha. That's so interesting. Yeah, we have an early assurance program through my undergrad through the local medical school, Prisma Health in Greenville. But as you guys can see, I didn't stay in South Carolina for medical school, so that kind of played a role into it. But let's go ahead and dive in to all of the content that we're going to be talking about today as it relates to the medical school personal statement. Again, this is designed for people that are preparing to apply for the upcoming cycle. So 2025, 2026. May is going to be here before we know it. I can't believe it's already almost the end of March. But again, the personal statement, it doesn't change much from year to year. So this is information that's going to be helpful for people at whether you're applying this year or later on. And if you have any questions as we go through this, we are going to have the end of the session be for the Q&A. So make sure that you drop those. There's like in the bottom right corner, a little box with a question mark. So make sure you drop those to, because if you just regularly comment it, we won't be able to see it as we go back through later on. So I just wanted to dive into a little bit of overview of what the personal statement is, like what's the length of it, why it matters, why is this even a conversation that we're having. And I think that the personal statement is really just a way for the admissions committee to learn about who you are and also why you want to be a doctor. There are a lot of other aspects of the application, like the activity section, the secondary questions that may learn about your extracurriculars and different things, but this is the one piece of the application I feel like that really highlights why medicine over other career choices. And I was actually chatting with someone helping them prepare for reapplication this upcoming cycle, and so I was reviewing different medical schools websites and their admissions requirements, and I found this quote, so I wanted to share it with you guys because I feel like it really embodies everything that I'm looking for when I'm reviewing personal statements for people that are applying to medical school. So it says a personal statement should be a genuine and vulnerable demonstration of who you are beyond grades and test scores. This is your opportunity to share your passion and motivation for medicine and how your experiences have impacted this drive along your journey. So I've never seen anything that I feel like in such a short sentence just embodies everything that the medical personal statement is. So do you have anything to add to that? What you think the medical personal statement is? Why does it matter when people are applying to medical school?
Yeah, no, I love that quote. Um, fully agree. I think the thing that I like about the personal statement is it kind of feels like it's like the first step towards an interview. Like for
Hmm.
me, it kind of feels like conversational. Like it's like a question and then you respond by like kind of illustrating like why you're interested in medicine and like your
Hmm.
whole medicine. So I feel like it's probably like one of the most important like aspects of like the medical school application.
I totally agree. And I think it's crazy because I started working on my personal statement very early on. I had so many drafts, I got so many people to read over it. And when you think about it, if you're applying via AMCAS or COMAS, it's 5,300 characters. If you're applying via TMDSIS, it's 5,000 characters. That comes out to be about a page, single spaced. So it doesn't seem like it should be something that you take months to work on. So I think the question that I get from a lot of pre-meds, when should I start working on it? Why do I need to dedicate so much time to working on it? And I really do think it's because it's so hard to, like you say, illustrate your journey and have that conversation while also maintaining the professionalism of an academic piece of writing in 5,300 characters. I feel like that's so hard. So that's something that I kind of run into with a lot of students. How long do you usually recommend that people take to write their personal statement, or have you had any experience like editing personal statements? What's that process been like for you?
Yeah. So for FlexMed specifically, the application opens in October. So I always recommend that people start writing their like personal statement during the summer. Um,
Yes.
yeah, because I wish that that was something that I did. I feel like I started it a little bit later, like writing it for myself. So I would say like during the summer, and then I also like would recommend like taking a lot of advice from other people, like medical students, like whoever it is that you want to edit your personal statement. But on the other side, also like I feel like there's like a max of like people that should limit your or like edit your personal statement because that was also something I ran into where like at the end it was like a lot of people were clashing that were like editing my personal statement. So I would say like a good amount of time to also be able to send your personal statement to people to edit because you don't want to send it to people like a week before it's due.
Hmm.
Um, so yeah, whatever that looks like for you. So yeah, a few months.
I agree with that. Totally agree. And especially want to emphasize the importance of being very thoughtful in who you get to read over your personal statement and the feedback that you get. I definitely think having someone that's in medicine, whether it's someone that's just gotten accepted or someone that's currently a medical student, maybe even a resident, even a physician, but just consider if they're physicians, how long they have been removed from the process, different things like that. But it's really important to have someone in medicine that understands what the goal of the personal statement is and what that should look like because there's no one way to write it, but I do think there are certain key ideas that you want to get across. So having someone in medicine who's written one before or edited some before is very helpful. And again, don't send it to so many people. I think that I was very lucky because I had so many people that were willing to help me as I was going through the application process, especially via social media. But I think at some point I just sent it to way too many people and I kind of had to backtrack because I was thinking, I don't necessarily feel like I like this person's thoughts or their revisions, and I think that's totally okay. You have to, I even when I give people edits, I'm like, take something, leave something, but then there's also some things I was like, this just doesn't convey who I am. If someone reads this personal statement and then they interview me, they're not going to feel like this is the same person. So I think you have to really think about like different people's writing styles. And if someone shared, I think another good thing is if someone shared their personal statement and you like their writing style or you like what you've seen, that's also someone that you can consider. I feel like this is some, yeah.
Yeah.
Anything do you want to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, just like the point that you made, I think someone also asked like asking people to like
Yep.
edit it. Um,
Huh.
like I also didn't know that many people in medicine, so
Mm-hmm.
that was one of the mistakes that I made was I sent it to like my high school counselor, just like people that aren't necessarily in medicine.
Yeah.
Um, and that was like the dangerous part because those people don't necessarily know like what medical schools are looking for. And it
Mm-hmm.
was when, like medical students and like our pre-health office, like someone that worked there, that was also pretty helpful.
Yeah, that's awesome. I totally agree with that. And I usually recommend like around four different people to review the medical school personal statement, like probably max. If you're getting more than that, sometimes it can be too much, but definitely agree, like having someone in medicine that can do it, having someone that knows you, not even to necessarily provide revisions, but kind of read it at the end and identify or evaluate if it's still showing your voice and if it resonates with how they view you as a person, just to make sure that your voice hasn't gotten lost in it. And it's also really difficult because of the fact that you're working on this for months. So sometimes you keep reading it and it's hard for you to take a step back and evaluate it. And then definitely, if you have like a favorite English professor in undergrad, or you have a friend, definitely friends that are English majors, I always get them to review it because I've reviewed so many, and I definitely focus on high level content, grammar if I see it, but I am not the grammar police, the spelling police. I am not the perfect person to do that. So definitely have someone that is really good with grammar and spelling edits to do like a final read over before you submit it.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree.
Perfect. Now I just want to highlight, I think, a couple of questions that I think the personal statement should answer. So I'll kind of share those. And then if you have anything you want to add or want to jump in on any of those. The first one is, why do you want to be a doctor? And I think this one is a question that's actually very difficult for people to answer when you really think about it. It takes a lot of time and brainstorming, and it's not even like, why do you want to be a doctor, but it's also sometimes, why not other careers in healthcare? Because I will see personal statements where you get to the cliche, I like science, I like helping people, or I want to provide care for people, but there's so many different careers where you can provide care for people. So what is it specifically about becoming a physician versus other careers in healthcare? How did you approach that, or like, did you approach that in your personal statement or when editing other people's?
Yeah. I mean, definitely for like even editing other people's, like reading through that question specifically, I feel like that's like the whole question of the personal statement,
Mm-hmm.
but it goes like unnoticed sometimes. Like you get lost in your stories, you get lost in like what you're trying to convey about yourself, and then you forget like
Mm-hmm.
that's the basis of the question. Um, so yeah, I would say for that, like I try not to focus on like other people. I feel like
Mm-hmm.
sometimes when someone's like telling a story, that's also like a mistake I've seen when editing. Like when telling a story, people may focus on like other people. For example, if
Yes.
someone family pushed them to do medicine, or like
Mm-hmm.
if it's a specific story they had from shadowing, like I think they focus on like the doctor that they shadowed, or like
Mm-hmm.
the family member. So I think it's always like good to like bring it back to yourself, and like you're the one applying to medical school, you're the one that wants to do medicine. So like kind of relating every story back to yourself and like your reasoning for like why you're using that to go into medicine.
I 1000% agree with that. I was actually providing that feedback to someone the other day, and I was saying, don't be afraid to have, it's so hard because, again, it's balancing personal versus academic writing, which is very difficult because you don't want it to only seem colloquial when you're writing it, but you also don't want it to seem like something that ChatGPT wrote or something that you're submitting like a manuscript. And so it's hard to find that balance, but don't be afraid to use I. And that's something weird because a lot of times in academic writing, you don't want to use I, but it's like, I witnessed this, I saw, I felt. Think about you and your experiences and your emotions. And I say the more times that I see I in a personal statement, the better it makes me feel because it feels like I'm going to learn about them rather than other people.
Yeah, emphasis on like I felt, like how
hmm
things like make you feel, and like more than like what you saw, but like how it did you. I feel like is my biggest recommendation.
Totally, totally agree with that. Another one that I would say, what experiences, maybe more specifically, what clinical experiences sparked or helped solidify your interest in medicine? And I say sometimes like clinical plus minus because I think it's definitely okay to include experiences in the personal statement that are not clinical in nature. There are a lot of reasons that people have decided to go to medical school or the reasons that they want to be a physician. But I also say plus because it's hard if I read an entire personal statement and I don't see any clinical experience there at all. It makes me wonder or question, how do you know? If you haven't really put yourself in that setting. And again, there's so many different ways to write a personal statement. So I'm sure there's people that are writing personal statements without including clinical experience. There are a lot of people that include it. So it's just all about the way that you write it and the way that you present it.
Yeah, especially with like the clinical experience, I feel like something that I've also noticed is sometimes like pre-meds will like use the clinical experience in a way where it kind of looks like an activities list, like in the essay. It's not necessarily like saying, oh, like what the impact was on them or like what they gained from the experience. It's more so just like I did this and this and this and like just leaving it there. So I would recommend like also like kind of showing instead of just like telling, like people also read your activities list, so like making your essay like a more I felt this or like kind of like what you were saying earlier.
I totally agree with that. And you bring up a good point. I know it's different for every admissions committee. Like some people, they'll have one person review your entire application. Another time, they might have some people reading the personal statement, other people reading the activity section. But I do agree that I don't want it to feel like the activity section. I don't want any part of your application to feel like a resume, because it's a resume doesn't really tell me about you. It just kind of tells me what you've done. And you're not necessarily applying for a job. I feel like resumes are for jobs, and the medical school application, I feel like they're picking a person that they think fits. I guess it is a career technically. I don't know how to really say this in the right way, but they're picking someone that's going to mesh with the class. They're picking someone that's going to mesh with their institution. They're picking someone that they would feel comfortable caring for their families and maybe them when they get older. So I think it's definitely something to consider there. And another thing that I say for people is, because you might have someone reading your entire application, if you're going to share a story from a clinical experience in your personal statement, don't write the same exact story in your activity section verbatim. And especially if usually when people are writing really long stories in their activity section, it's the most meaningful experience. And if you don't have two stories from an experience, I feel like it's not your most meaningful experience.
Yeah, definitely. I agree with that. Yeah.
I think another question that I like to see answered in a personal statement, sometimes this is answered, sometimes it's not, but what values do you hope or qualities do you hope to embody as a physician? I think this is shown in the takeaway sentences or just the way that people write their stories. I don't need you to say, I want to be an XYZ physician. But the way that you talk about your experiences, maybe it's serving in an underserved community or volunteering at a free clinic, that shows me that you care about taking care of everybody and, not focusing on people's attributes and whether that decides if they have a right to health care. So I definitely think that's something also to think about because, yeah, you can just be a doctor that's not good, or you could be like a great doctor and have all these qualities that are very important.
Yeah. I think also like a quality that's like kind of not thought about sometimes is like curiosity. Like you haven't been through medical school. Like you don't have
Mm-hmm.
to be like a perfect like
No.
physician right now or like
Yes.
as that. So just like being curious about like different people, about like different experiences and like showing that from your essays, I feel like is pretty helpful for the person that's reading it.
I totally agree. I was also again chatting with a same student that I'm helping reapply this upcoming cycle, and something that I see a lot for non-traditional students, which I know neither of us, because we did go, from undergrad to medical school, but something I see a lot as well is, if you have 5 years kind of out of undergrad and you've done one clinical experience, I think it's nice to get a variety of exposures. Even if you know exactly what you want to do, don't only shadow. For me, I want to go into family medicine. Even now as a medical student, I don't get to only do family medicine electives. So I think it's really nice to see the breadth of medicine. So to shadow different specialties, work in different roles for your clinical experience, or work at different sites for your clinical experience. And again, I think sharing that would also highlight that curiosity that you mentioned, and totally agree. And kind of going off of that as well, I think that's another reason why you want to have someone who is reading your personal statement who's in medicine, because I remember as a pre-med student, I would be shadowing and I'd say, why are they not spending time with the patient? I feel like this is rushed. Are they sure the patient knows what they were saying? And it's easy to like have that judgment as an outside eye, but now being in medical school and not even fully being a physician, because I know it gets harder when we have to figure out billing and we have our own patients to see. We still have the luxury of having more time with patients, but I now see the perspective of why you kind of have to, we can't stay an hour in every patient's room when we're rounding. And so just being on the other side. And so making sure that you're not jumping to conclusions or passing off judgment, especially if you're also saying this is the career that you want to go into.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I wanted to share a sample outline of, I guess, kind of how my personal statement was ordered, and then also how I see a lot of personal statements ordered. Again, not because this is the only way to do it, because there's so many ways, but if you're struggling, I think this is a nice starter outline to get everything on the page. And then, of course, as your experiences and stories develop, you can always change it. So I love starting with a good hook. You don't want anybody to read the beginning of your personal statement and be like, okay, I don't want to keep reading. I do not want to end like that. But you also don't need to have it be some reality TV show, like make it true to who you are. There's just a way that you can write about anything that's really engaging and keeps the reader interested. And a lot of times I feel like also I'll see in the introduction or this hook kind of people's initial exposure to healthcare, or how they initially thought they wanted to go into healthcare. Not even medicine specifically, but they're like, okay, people are cool, maybe it could be nursing, maybe it could be, PA, maybe it's doctor, just, okay, healthcare in general. And then after that, it's usually the body paragraphs that I read, which are going through people's clinical experiences that are kind of building up to them deciding that they want to be a doctor, or helping them realize different things that they learned about medicine. And then it's that concluding paragraph, really just not introducing anything else, but wrapping everything up. A lot of times I'll see if people have shared different stories about patients or shared a story about themselves in the beginning, then they'll bring that back in the conclusion, kind of tie it all together and keep everything nice and wrapped up. So that's kind of what I've seen a lot. Is there any templates that you've seen? Have you seen that? What are your
Yeah,
thoughts?
yeah. I think most of the personal statements that I've seen so far, like everyone likes to start it
Mm-hmm.
differently. And like I kind of that's like the first impression that I'm getting about that
Mm-hmm.
student is like how they bring their personal statement. And then the other thing that you mentioned that I wanted to emphasize is like the conclusion. I think it's like really nice when I see a personal statement that has a conclusion that ties everything together.
Yes.
And like it reads very differently from a conclusion that like kind of trails off and doesn't like wrap the whole essay. It's like kind of brings you back to the beginning. So I think essays that bring you right back to the beginning for like the conclusion and just like kind of like touch on everything that's been spoken
Mm-hmm.
about throughout the essay. Love that.
I totally agree. I think it's so nice to finish and be like, wow, I'm excited. I've even already read a personal statement for this cycle, for someone where I finished it and I was smiling. I was so excited. I'm like, I want you to be my doctor. I'm rooting for you. Let's get you into medical school. And that's how you want people reading your personal statement to feel. And you have to think about, it's not necessarily everybody's had some form of clinical experience. Everybody wants to go to medical school, and so it's really like not necessarily what sets you apart, but I think, like you said, talking about the way that you feel, the way that experiences impacted you, makes the reader feel that way, makes them connect more to your story, makes them understand you. And I feel like that is really what sets apart really, really great personal statements.
Yeah, I agree.
A couple of other things that I wanted to talk about. We can just briefly go through these because I think we've highlighted a lot of them previously, but just thinking about the common mistakes that I see in a lot of personal statements. And these are all mistakes that I made in my initial drafts, which is why you want to start early and get people to give feedback on it. But something that you definitely emphasized is that telling versus showing. So it's not I saw, I did, there was, but it's I felt. Bring yourself into that experience and write it like a story so we feel like we're in that moment with you and understanding how that impacted you.
Yeah, I think along with that, like some people when they write stories, it like really immerses you in the story. Like I'm
Mm-hmm.
reading it and I feel like I'm there. And so like for those experiences, like I think someone mentioned like having an English teacher like read it, or like you mentioned that. So I think in those types of like stories and stuff, like that type of storytelling, it would be beneficial to like pull in someone that is like really good at writing, and that could be like a
Mhm.
something. But yeah, I
I
agree.
totally, yes, 100%. Another thing is lack of reflection and takeaways. It's great if you can share a good story. I'm like, oh wow, that's really cool. But what did you learn from that? How did it, like you said earlier, how did it impact you? And again, this doesn't always have to be overt. I usually like to have a concluding sentence at the end of every paragraph just to make sure, like, y'all are getting what I'm getting. But make sure, like, we can feel that you understand that. And one of the things that I often see is people setting up the story, which I don't always like. So the first sentence of the paragraph will be like, and then I started volunteering, which taught me X, Y, and Z. And so I'm like, okay, so if that, you already told me, why do I need to read the rest of the paragraph? Or I'm expecting the paragraph to tell me that, and when it doesn't, it feels like it falls a little bit short. So I do feel like I'm a traditionalist in the sense of I like you to tell me the story and then end up, again, how you have a conclusion at the end of your essay, pull it all back together and really highlight that.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think that also goes along with like being able to like tell a story and like really like put someone there, like make them
Mhm.
there.
Right. Another thing is just being too generic, which is kind of hard. And I don't have an example of this kind of off the back. I feel like I see this a lot more in activity sections rather than the personal statement, but I'll just finish reading it and I'm like, I feel like I've read this before. Or I feel like I I don't have a picture of who you are. It feels like anybody could have written this. And I feel like that's also where you have the power of including I and inserting yourself, but really talking about the way that you feel when things impact you. Because I never want to feel like I'm reading a story and after I read it, I don't understand anything. So make sure when you're writing your personal statement or just writing anything, like you're including enough detail that it's personal to you. If you could give your personal statement to someone else, they could read it and it could sound like they wrote it. It's not personal. It's not personal.
Yeah, I think that goes back to like what you were saying earlier about like really being able to like show like what you learned from experiences and like what your takeaway was, or else if you're just telling a story about like someone else, then anyone.
Mhm. Yeah. And again, I think that's also why it's really hard to talk about shadowing experiences in a personal statement, which I talked about a shadowing experience in the personal statement, and I don't tell people to stray away from it. But I think sometimes it is hard if you are a bystander or just observing for us to really understand. So the way that I talked about in my personal statement, I watched a patient code and it was when I was on an overnight shift. But I was able to talk about it from the way of this is what I was seeing, this is what I was feeling, these are the sounds that I was hearing. This is what after I watched this patient pass away, this is what I wish I would have known. This is what I wish I could have done, like that kind of thing, rather than I watched the doctor do this and the doctor did that and the doctor did that and this was the outcome. So you can see kind of the two, contrasting those, how they could present when someone's reading it.
Yeah, absolutely.
The last thing that I wanted to kind of say is just avoid negative vibes. I feel like that's also a mistake. Again, we kind of talked about this a little bit earlier, I think it's totally fine to be critical of the healthcare system. The healthcare system is not perfect, but I do feel like our medicine as a career are very protective of each other. So talking about another doctor, even if you don't name them, I feel like that kind of puts guards up and it makes admissions committees, us reading it, feel some type of way. So I definitely think, again, if you experience something really bad or you had like a bad personal experience and that's what led you to want to do medicine, of course, talk about it, but it's just the way that you talk about it, I think.
Yeah, I think that also goes back to what you said earlier about like when you're writing, like it's always good to remember that, you learn a lot when you're in medical school. Like it's really
Mhm.
it's easier to be critical and stuff like before kind of seeing the other perspective. I like one of my essays, it was writing about like a disappointment that I've seen in the healthcare system.
Mhm.
So that was like something that I implemented. But I think in terms of just like being negative overall, like I try to spin it into a positive, and that's always like what I tell people when I'm editing their personal statements is like try to spin this into a positive, because you never want to leave like an essay on a sour note, or like you just want to talk about what you learned from like that experience or like what you grow like going forward.
Right. I think that's really what it comes down to, even more than like feeling protective about your, your career, different things like that. It's just not exciting to read a statement and then feel like, dang, that sucked. Or feel like, okay, they're pessimistic, they have negative vibes, you don't want that to be the vibe that's emanating from your personal statement. So that's kind of like everything that I wanted to talk about. This is perfect timing, about halfway through, to transition into questions. I will scroll back through the comments because I know there have been some questions. I think someone already dropped a question in the chat box as well. So if you guys have any other questions, make sure that you drop that in the Q&A or in the comments if you can't find the Q&A, and we'll make sure to address those. So I'm just going to scroll all the way back up and see kind of any questions that we had. It just shows me everybody that joined. It should be a way to like filter out comments. Yeah. How do you know who's the correct person to send your personal statement to? I think we kind of answered that already. And I just want to reiterate, like, do not feel bad about not using people's feedback. Everybody's different. Just don't feel bad about that. Like, sometimes you just be like, thank you so much, and move on with your life.
Yeah.
And don't send them another essay. Let's see. Yeah, is it okay to have someone outside of medicine review it to be able to identify if this still reflects your voice? I definitely agree. I think it's nice to have someone that's not in medicine to review it. But then again, always having someone in medicine to review it to make sure that it's answering what we want it to answer as being the medical school personal statement. Let's see if we had some question. Let's see. Oop, oop. I don't know why. Oh, it's showing me things from my stories. Okay. How many stories, experiences do you recommend including in the personal statement? How can we tie stories together to convey a single message? Do you want to tackle that one to start?
Yeah.
Okay, perfect.
So the first question was, how many stories should you have in a personal statement?
Mm-hmm.
So a personal statement is usually around like 500 words. So it's always like good to think about like, okay, there's going to be perhaps like an introduction type of thing and then like a conclusion. So I would say like as much as like you'd want to share about a story, it depends on that. So for example, like my story, it took up like half of the personal statement. But I kind of like made it like circle back at the end, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
I talked about how like I volunteered abroad, and then I circled back at the end when I was talking about how I brought that experience back with me. So as long as it like feels cohesive and it feels like at the end of the day it's still like one person and like it has a central theme, I think we can kind of like play around with it. So like, but I wouldn't say like more than three, honestly.
I totally agree. I was gonna say, once you're getting like 3 to 4, like if you're getting 5, I'm sometimes, especially if you want to name everybody, I'm like, I don't even know who we're talking about anymore. I got lost. No, it's too much.
Yeah, it's a lot to keep up with.
Yeah. And again, and I think that last question, how do you tie everything together? You emphasized this earlier. It's really about that conclusion, bringing it all together. People talk about having themes in your medical school application, and I don't think you should try to come up with right off the bat, like sit here and be like, this is a theme that I want my medical school application to convey. I think as you write your personal statement, you write your activities section, you write your secondaries, you interview, if you're passionate about things, I think those are gonna come out as you write them. So my background in undergrad was in public health, did a lot of public health research, and I feel like that was a big thing that was conveyed. And now I want to do primary care, social determinants of health is super huge in that. So that's just always been something that I'm interested in. So I think it was conveyed in that way, but it was never something that I thought about. Oh, make sure I'm going to include this because it's related, but I'm not going to include this because it's not related. I don't think you have to like be that nitpicky about it. Another question, I think we already answered this one. Okay. Can you include something you've learned from a hobby? It wouldn't be the main story. I think this is one that I would have to see it in action, see it how it's written out. But I definitely think, I mean, if it's a hobby and it contributed to why you want to become a doctor, totally. But most times I see people talking about their hobbies in the activity section, like including a hobby in the activity section. I don't think I've seen one included in a personal statement, but again, I think it could work depending on how you write about it. What do you think? Any thoughts?
Yeah. No, I think what you said earlier, about if it contributed to like why you want to go into medicine, like as long as it's contributing towards the prompt, um, and it's not the main story, I think yeah, you can play around with that and like kind of maybe integrate it into the main story if possible.
Yeah, totally agree. Okay, let's see what other questions we have. Should we include any medical problems that we dealt with as an introduction? I think it's all about the way that you write it. I think that's a really common thing that I see is people talking about their own experiences with the healthcare system and that then informing their desire to want to go into medicine. So that's how I started my personal statement. It wasn't a personal experience with me, but it was a personal experience with my family and diabetes in my family and not really understanding why my dad had to get these shots or go to the doctor more often than I did. And that sparked my curiosity, like you said earlier. And then I delved deeper into it, and then that led me kind of, let's see what this is, let's do this, and volunteer. And then that's honestly, really and truly how I got interested in medicine. And still to this day, I'm always like I literally was helping my dad like figure out a new insulin pump the other day. So it's just so integral to my story, and now even the provider that I want to be. But yeah, I definitely think it's okay to include medical problems that you dealt with.
Yeah, I also feel like I've seen that in like essays that I've seen. So yeah, I feel like it's what you said earlier, like how you start it and like how you write it, because I would have to see it to
Yeah.
really.
Let's see if we have any other questions. I think we already. Yeah, so we answered any people or resources to edit personal statements. We can go ahead and answer that now. I have my course, Step by Step Guide to Crafting the Medical School Personal Statement, and also my larger course From Applicant to Accepted. Both of those talk about the medical school personal statement. Both of those have options when you purchase the course to get me to review your medical school application, including your personal statement. And I'm also reviewing personal statements. I've already reviewed a handful for this upcoming cycle. So now's the time if you haven't started writing. You can click the link in my bio. It has all of the information. Or if you can't find it, just feel free to shoot me a message. I'll be going on spring break next week, so I'll probably be shutting down people like signups for personal statement reviews middle of this week, and then starting them back in the first week of April. Are you editing personal statements at all, or do you review applications for for applicants?
Yeah, I do meetings with people, and then I also edit personal statements. Both of those are in my bio as well.
Amazing. Yeah, so reach out to one of us or both of us. We would love to help. And then I think we are getting some. Okay, this is another one. What's the most common mistake you see from students who write about a clinical experience? Mm, That's a good question. Do you have an answer, or you also need to
Yeah,
think?
I mean, my answer is what we
Yeah,
talked about earlier,
yeah,
which is like when people talk about clinical experience, I feel like either it's like a lot of focus is on the negative and like something that they weren't happy with, like with their clinical experience, depending on, I don't know, like exactly what kind of clinical experience it is.
hmm
And then if it's like shadowing, which is what we talked about in depth,
yeah,
focusing on the doctor, because I feel like that's something I've seen like a lot, where like people don't focus on themselves, like they focus on, oh, the doctor is so amazing, the doctor like did this and this, and not necessarily like what their experience was there.
yeah. I also feel like sometimes people don't answer the question. So a lot of times you think about your clinical experience, and the question is, why do you want to go to medical school? Like, what helped you decide that? And sometimes I'll see people like just write about an experience, and maybe you decide you want to be a doctor in high school or early in college, and you're writing about this experience from senior year. But I want to understand how it informs still why you want to be a doctor, even if it's an experience that happened after you already made that decision. You need it to relate it back to the question of why you want to be a doctor. Because some people are like, okay, to gain more, and probably use the same thing in my personal statement, to gain more exposure, to gain more experience. People use that as a transition, but why? Like, why did you do that? So I think that's a main one that I see is just you write about, and even because it's a clinical experience doesn't mean it answers the question of why you want to be a doctor. I think that's another one that maybe we didn't address earlier that is something that we see.
Yeah, especially with those stories that are like, oh, I've wanted to be a doctor since I was like 5 years old, or like when it's like really young,
Mm-hmm.
and I have to like have like a continued like path of like, okay, so then when I was in high school I did this, or like how you continued that like journey, and not necessarily just like, okay, like, a lot of people start with like, oh, they wanted to be a doctor when they're younger, but what did you do going forward?
Mm-hmm. I think also I don't feel like you have to write the personal statement as a chronological narrative. I think there's so many different ways that you can write about different experiences. Of course, I think chronologically, a lot of times that's how the way that we think about it. And then, of course, it sets it up for a great story because that's the order of our lives. But if you're going to use timelines in your personal statement, be consistent with it, because I've definitely also read some personal statements where I'll see somebody talking about, okay, when I was 8 years old, and then they'll say after college I did this. I'm like, what happened between 8 and after like high school? Like, what? Where are we? And so I think it's sometimes hard for me to follow. And so just being cognizant, if you're using timelines, that it kind of makes sense and we understand how it's a journey. Another question that we had. Yeah, this is a good one. Does your personal statement include experiences that are also a part of your 15 activities? How do you not sound redundant? Yeah, this is a great question. My personal statement, so I would say I started my personal statement talking about like my family, my experience with diabetes, and then I talked about when I was volunteering at a free clinic, and then I talked about when I was shadowing overnight, when I saw the patient code, and then I finished up with my conclusion. So it was like two body paragraphs really, and then the intro and the conclusion. And I would say the shadowing experience, like usually in your activity section, you don't write about your shadowing, you kind of list it out, and you combine all of your shadowing experiences. So that was included in my activity section, but just as a list out. And then the free clinic experience, I actually don't think I didn't include the free clinic experience in my activity section. But usually I will say, like, if you have clinical experience that you've done in high school, I mean, in college, then it's usually included in your activity section as well. And it's totally okay to include that, but you just want to make sure, like we said, you don't want to sound redundant. Just don't share the same story. If you've done, even if you volunteer like 3 days 3 times somewhere, which I mean, if you only volunteered and did something like 3 times, I don't know if we're including it. But even if you did something 3 times, you should have like 3 stories, 3 experiences that you can share. So just try not to verbatim repeat what you said.
Yeah, I agree. I think for me, I included every single thing that I put in my personal statement in my activities list. Like
Yeah.
there was really overlap. So I would recommend that. I don't think there's any reason for you not to include like an activity that you've done in your personal statement but not in your activities list.
Right.
But yeah, so I would include that, and then definitely like do not put the same story like Morgan you said. Just like make sure you're saying different things.
Totally agree. Let's see. We have the questions are piling in now. How many drafts did you go through before having your final personal statement? Guys, I wrote 13 drafts of my personal statement. In hindsight, way too many, and some of it was backtracking because I got too many people to write to revise my personal statement. I also something that we haven't talked about. Don't send your personal statement to multiple people at one time. Like one person at a time, because then you get like 5 different people with comments, and you're like, wait, but maybe if I'd have done this, they would have thought something different. So if you start early enough, like you can send it to one person, they can give you feedback, and then you can like edit it and send it to someone else. But yeah, I did go through 13 drafts, but I also started working on my personal statement in September, the year before I applied. So that gave me like 7, 8 months to work on it. But because I started in September, I was kind of like done with it by March. And I just took my hands off of it and tried not to edit it again. And of course, I read it back after submitting via EMCAS, and I could read it back today, and I would still change things. So it's never going to be perfect, but it's like, okay, this embodies who I am, and like I'm happy with presenting this.
Yeah. I honestly, I don't even know how many like drafts I went through. I went through a lot, but I also I didn't have that much time to write it. Like
Mhm.
I took, I think, 2 months, 3 months. And I sent it to like a lot of different people. So
Yeah.
yeah, at one point though, you just have to full send it because like I was like, at this point, I need to be done.
Yeah, I totally agree. Yeah, you just kind of have to like go with the vibes. It kind of just like depends on how you start. I mean, there are people that probably have done multiple drafts and they're reapplying, so they, have to do more drafts, or people that are really good writers and really good storytellers and they can write like 3 drafts and it's as good as it's gonna get. So it definitely depends. This is another one. It's not necessarily related to personal statement, but like the AMCAS application. But I think it's a good question, so we'll address it. I have lots of clinical experiences that span over several thousand hours in different specialties. How should I arrange this in my application? That's a very good question. Again, it's definitely something where you want to have someone sit down with you after you've put this in your after you've put this in your application, make sure it looks right, flows right. But usually I recommend separating out. So if you have there's a difference between clinical experience and shadowing in the personal statement. I mean, in the medical school application. So in the AMCAS application, one of the categories is shadowing physician observation. So that's shadowing. So that's not what we're going to be talking about. The other one, you can have paid employment, that's clinical or medical, and then you can have volunteer experience, that is medical clinical. So these are volunteering at the free clinic. These are working as an EMT, when I interned at a doctor's office. That is what clinical experience would be. And I would say clinical experience is valued in medical school applications because it shows that you have really explored working with patients and you know what that entails. And I would definitely try to include them if you can. If you did multiple jobs, like working as an EMT through multiple companies or multiple places, you could combine it if you want. But if you have enough to talk about for both of them and you're not at um, your 15 like limit for the number of activities in your medical school application, then I would consider separating them. But again, it's all about like not being redundant. So if you don't have anything else to say, if you're gonna write out the same thing, I was on the ambulance and I've never worked as an EMT and like people call the phone and then I did this, like you don't want to write that out twice. So I think it's definitely going to be like more about how many activities you have in total, and then how different they are and what you have to say about them.
Yeah.
Anything you want to
Yeah,
add?
no, you said like everything I was thinking, but also several thousand hours is a lot. So I would say like if these are all different specialties and if you have like a story for all of these activities that you've done, then I would separate them because unless it's like shadowing, which you wouldn't, but if you like learn different things, if you had different experiences and like maybe even different roles in all these clinical experiences, then I would separate them.
Definitely. Totally agree. Okay, let's see. We have about 10 more minutes, so we'll try to. Oh, what is happening? Do you want to answer this one? This is just a question about the FlexMed program. What specific activities make someone unique for the FlexMed program at time?
Yeah. Um,
If you can even answer, I mean, it's like it's a hard question, but maybe you could talk about a little bit about your activities, what your application looked like.
Yeah, no, it's a good question. I feel like there's a lot of classmates of mine that have also gotten through the FlexMed program, and we're all very different, and we did like a lot of different activities to get here. So you don't necessarily have to have like one theme or something to like make you stand out. Like whatever your activities are, that's most likely going to help you stand out because no one else does like the activities that you've done. Um, but with that being said, I mean, you can also look a little bit more into the school. Something that I realized when I was applying is that the school like values diversity and like that was one of the reasons I wanted to come. So like a lot of the things that I found out are also the reasons why I wanted to apply is like it's also like pretty big on like social advocacy and like things like that. So just like looking into the school and seeing their culture. Like if a school is very into research, then that's something that you might want to prioritize in your application. So for Sinai specifically, I would say that's like something that I was considering. I included, which is like part of the application, like things that I did in high school. So I volunteer at a hospital. I also worked like when I was in college at a peds ED. So I included that. I also included like a lot of other things that weren't medicine. So like I was a part of this low income first gen program in like all of high school, and I'm still a part of the program now. So that's something that I continue to contribute to, and like that's something I wrote about in my essays as well. So that was like something that like it meant a lot to me. And then I also like volunteered in Ethiopia, which is like where my family's from. So that was something that I added, and that was also something that I put as like one of my most meaningful activities, because that like meant a lot to me. And there's other people that volunteer and like do a lot of just like the things that we do as pre-meds, but no one's gonna have your story. And then you also will use like the activity section to like have a story for each activity that you've done, so use that to like your benefit and like really personalize it.
Totally agree. And kind of going off of what you said, everybody's story is going to be different. And like you said, too, a lot of people are going to have similar experiences, but don't use things to like check the box. Like, yes, I'm telling you right now, I would not recommend applying to medical school if you don't have any clinical experience. That's just like, I'll tell you that right now. But I don't also want you to be going around to like 12 different places trying to do like 12 different clinical experiences. Like, I interned at a family medicine practice. I started August 2020, like summer after my sophomore year. I loved it so much. I stayed there for the last 2 years of undergrad. So it's not like I had to have I got a bunch of different experiences within that one experience. And then, when you're talking about things in your interviews, people are going to be able to see your interest and your excitement. Like you were smiling just talking about, your volunteering in Ethiopia, and you were, remembering the PZD. Like I can see it in your face, and I can see, and so I think that's something that's really important, is not just doing things to check the box or to put them in an application or trying to copy what someone else has done that's been successful, but really following your passions. And getting clinical experience, but following your passions and what you're interested in, because that'll really show once you get to the interview phase and get to learn about you. Let's see. We'll see what other questions. All right. I think we got most of them in the Q&A, but I'm going to scroll up because I know people started dropping a lot of questions in here as well. Let's see. What are your thoughts on using ChatGPT to write personal statements? I 10 out of 10 would not recommend doing that. So there is software that can detect that medical schools are using that will detect if something is written by ChatGPT. We recently also at our medical school now, even if we're submitting manuscripts to to journals and stuff, we have to submit it through this. So I don't know if you guys had Turn It In or whatever it was called when you were like in middle and high school. We used to have to submit our papers and turn it in to make sure we weren't plagiarizing. And I feel like that's kind of what medical school applications are going to do. I mean, you can always like use ChatGPT, like give me some brainstorming questions or give me some links to good personal statements for inspo, or can you read this paragraph and like give me clarity, does it answer this question, or can you give me grammar changes, or does this give the right tone? But using it to write your personal statement, I would absolutely not recommend, and that would probably not be good for you.
I second that.
Okay. Yeah. Let's see if we had any other questions. Oh, this is another good one. How would you recommend incorporating hobbies into the activity section? Example, cooking, baking as a hobby. How can it be included, and does it have to relate back to why medicine, or can it just have a takeaway? So this is my opinion. I think people have different opinions on this, so I'd be interested to hear if you have a different opinion, or, I mean, everybody's different. That's why we're human. But I do not feel like every single activity in your activity section has to relate back to medicine. I don't need you to write about cooking and be like, and then I learned to use different ingredients, which is how we'll be able to learn to work with different patients. Like I'll see people doing that and I'm like, it's too forced, when it doesn't exactly flow. If you have an experience and it taught you something about what kind of doctor you want to be, or like why you want to be a physician, totally. But I think the personal statement is to answer why you want to be a doctor, and the activity section is to show us who you are, what you're passionate about. So just tell us about your cooking experience and why you liked it. And of course, if there's something that you learned from it, or if there's a reason that you enjoyed it, or a reason you initially got into cooking, I want to see that, like talk about that, what you gained from that, or why you like to do it and why you continue doing it. But I don't feel like at the end of every activity description, you have to tell me why that's going to make you a better doctor.
Yeah, no, I agree. I don't think you necessarily, like, if you're putting it in your personal statement, yes, that needs to relate to, like,
Yes, exactly.
but if it's just in your activity section, just write about the activity. Like, if it had nothing to do with medicine, honestly, just write, like, why you enjoy it, why you're doing it. Like, the people that are reading your application are, like, people. Like,
Exactly.
they appreciate your hobbies. Like, they probably have their own. Like, I know our admissions, like, person here, and she's, like, great. She talks about her hobbies all the time. Like, they're all people at the end of the day. So just, like, write about why you did it, or like why you enjoy doing that hobby. In terms of like how you want to like list it out, I think they put like cooking and baking. So like for those two, I would put them together. I wouldn't like separate them or anything. So yeah, but you can like list out your
Yeah,
hobbies.
I totally agree with that. Amazing. One of my recommenders suggested, we'll answer this last question. One of my recommenders suggested talking a little bit about my coursework and research and my personal statement, but I have not heard many people do that. Do you have any thoughts on this? I hear some people like including coursework in their personal statement, like if they want to like talk about like red flags, if they like withdrew from courses. Again, I don't think you need to put that in your personal statement. Like save that for, there's a part of the application where you can talk about if there's any hardships or anything that you wanted to explain, or even some secondaries will actually, like if you got a C or below in certain courses, like explain that, do it there, because if not, they might not even like think about it. If you're putting your personal statement, like it's bringing attention to it, which I wouldn't necessarily do. And research, I think a lot of people that have done clinical research will talk about that, or if research was some, if it's related to your why you want to be a doctor, like if research is why you want to be a doctor, definitely talk about it. But I've also seen other ways where I see an application that's so much research, no clinical experience, that I wonder why not get a PhD, or like why do you actually want to interact with patients. So that would be my only thing of being wary there. But again, it's gonna, you need to get someone who's like in medical school, in residency, that kind of understands and can read it and evaluate if the way that you're writing about it like works out.
Yeah, no, I agree. I don't think coursework would necessarily go in your personal statement. And then for the research, like what you said, as long as it relates to like why you want to be a doctor, is like what the whole personal statement is about. And like try not to be too technical. I feel like sometimes when people write about research, it can get like really nitty gritty. And it feels like a little too technical for like a reader to like have to read. So just like be a little bit more like conversational and like what you took away from the research, not necessarily like what you did, because what you did will go in your activity section.
Agreed. Totally agree. Well, we are coming up on the end of the hour. Thank you so much again for joining us. Thank you everybody for tuning in. I can't believe this was part 3 of the webinar series, and we have at least 2 more of these. I am super excited to continue doing this. Hope this has been helpful for you guys. Again, get started on working on your personal statement if you're applying this cycle. Reach out to me, join the course if you're interested in getting your personal statement or your activity section revised. Would love to help you in that journey. And again, do you just want to share a little bit about how people can sign up for your services again as well?
Yeah. So yeah, I have a link in my bio. You can access that there. Like if you want to schedule a meeting, I meet usually on the weekends. And then I also just edit personal statements, so that should also be there.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys so much for tuning in. We won't take up any more of your time, but hopefully this was helpful. And if I remember, I will get this uploaded on YouTube so you guys can watch back soon. So take care, everybody. Have a great night.